She stood in the back room of the church still wearing the dress. The bells had stopped ringing 20 minutes ago. The guests had stopped whispering 10 minutes after that. And Edmund Hale had been gone since before any of it began, slipped out the side door like a man who had never intended to stay. This was the second time. The second white dress, the second borrowed veil. The second morning Nora Calloway had looked at her reflection and believed, truly believed, that this time would be different. She was 28 years old, and the town of Silver Falls, Illinois already had a name for her. The Cursed Bride. But curses don't happen to you. They happen because of you. And that was the thought Nora carried out of the church through the whispering crowd and up the stairs to her childhood bedroom, where she would sit for 3 days wondering what it was about her specifically that made men decide to leave. She didn't know yet that the answer wasn't what she thought. She didn't know yet that 2,000 miles away, a man named Ethan Voss was sitting on a porch in Montana Territory watching the sun go down over the land that someone was trying to take from him, land that his wife had died protecting. She didn't know yet that by the time summer ended, she would be that man's wife, that she would fire a rifle for the first time in her life, that she would find a tin box buried under a barn floor and hold in her hands a letter written by a dead woman to a grieving husband, a letter that said, "Let yourself live again." She didn't know any of it yet. Subscribe to our channel and stay until the end to discover how one woman's worst moment became the beginning of everything. Comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. The dress came off in pieces. First, the veil, which Nora unpinned herself because she couldn't bear to ask anyone to help. Then the long row of buttons down the back, which she couldn't reach, and so she sat on the edge of her bed for 20 minutes with her arms twisted behind her before Aunt Cecile came in without knocking and worked them loose one by one in silence. Neither of them spoke until the dress was folded on the chair, and Nora was in her house clothes sitting at the window watching the street below. "People are going home," Aunt Cecile said. "Good. Mrs. Alderman is still outside. She's been talking to the Reverend for 10 minutes. She's composing the story," Nora said. "She'll need time to get all the details right." Aunt Cecile sat on the edge of the bed. She was a compact woman in her late 50s, sharp-featured and practical, with gray beginning to overtake the brown in her hair. She had never married. She had opinions about that which she mostly kept to herself. "Do you want me to send someone to find out why he left?" she asked. "No. Nora, I don't want to know why." Nora pressed her fingertips against the cold glass. "Not today." The street below was nearly empty now. A few children ran past the milliner's shop, oblivious and careless the way children always were. A dog lay in the shade of the livery stable. The wedding flowers, white roses someone had tied to the church gate, moved in the afternoon breeze like they didn't know yet that the occasion was over. "This is the second time," Nora said quietly. "I know." The whole town watched. Again. Aunt Cecile didn't try to argue with that. It was true, and she knew better than to dress truth up as something gentler. "Yes," she said, "they watched." Nora turned away from the window. "What's wrong with me, Cecile?" The older woman's face did something complicated. For a moment, she looked as though she might answer differently than she did. Then she straightened her back and said, "Nothing. Not one thing." "Then why do they always leave?" That, Aunt Cecile said, is a different question entirely. Her father came to see her the next morning. Hugh Calloway was a banker by profession and a practical man by temperament. He had loved his wife enormously and grieved her death for 2 years, then folded that grief away, the way he folded everything he couldn't use neatly, efficiently into a drawer he rarely opened. He had raised Nora with fairness, if not warmth, provided for her with consistency, if not imagination. And on the morning after her second abandoned wedding, he sat in the chair across from her bed and told her he had a proposal. "There is a man in Montana Territory," he said, "a rancher. His name is Ethan Voss. He placed an advertisement in the Illinois Farmers Register 6 weeks ago, seeking a wife." Nora looked at him. "A mail-order arrangement," her father said, which was not a question. "I know how it sounds, but I've corresponded with him twice. He seems straightforward." "You've been corresponding with him." "I began looking into options after the first time." Hugh kept his voice even. "After Edmund." Nora stood up from her chair and walked to the other side of the room. She needed the distance. "You assumed there would be a second time." "I hoped there wouldn't be." He paused. "I was wrong to hope." She stood with her back to him for a moment, staring at the small framed portrait of her mother on the dresser. Eleanor Calloway had been dead for 16 years. She looked out from the portrait with a slight, private smile, as though she knew something the painter didn't. "Tell me about him," Nora said finally. 36 years old, widower, runs a cattle ranch of about 300 acres outside a town called Millstone Creek. He lost his wife 3 years ago. Her father cleared his throat. He is not a wealthy man, but his land is productive and his debts are few. His letters are direct. He makes no promises he cannot keep. What does he want? A partner, someone capable, someone who will not require constant society or comfort. He is isolated up there and he knows it, and he has been honest about what that means. Hugh set the folded letters on the bed beside her. He is not looking for romance. He says so plainly. Nora picked up the letters. The handwriting was angular, pressed hard into the page as though the man wrote the way he did everything else, without hesitation, without ornament. Miss Calloway, I will be plain with you because I haven't got patience for anything else. I need a wife in the practical sense. Someone who can work alongside me, handle isolation, and manage a household without luxury. I had a marriage I valued once, and I don't expect to find that again. What I can offer you is fairness, honest labor, a roof, and my word that I will never raise my hand to you. If those terms are agreeable, write back. Ethan Voss. She read it twice. Then she set it down and read the second letter, which was shorter and even more direct, answering questions her father had apparently asked on her behalf about the land, the cattle, the winters, the nearest neighbors. He sounds cold, she said. He sounds honest. Nora looked at the letters in her hand. She thought about Edmund Hale, about the way he had looked at her on their first evening together 3 years ago now, that warm, attentive gaze that she had mistaken for love and which had turned out to be something more like performance. She thought about William Garrett before that, about the flowers and the flattery and the beautiful words that had dissolved like sugar in rain. She thought about how she was 28 years old and the town already called her cursed, and that this house, her father's house, her childhood house, had stopped feeling like home some time ago without her quite noticing. When does he need an answer, she asked. The stage leaves Thursday. That gives you 4 days. She nodded once and kept the letters. That night, she went to see Reverend Cole. She didn't plan to. She had been walking, which she did when she couldn't sleep, through the back streets of Silver Falls, where the houses thinned out and the fields began. She found herself at the church without intending to, and the light was on inside, and she knocked before she could decide not to. The Reverend was a mild man, white-haired and careful, who had performed both of her almost weddings and seemed genuinely pained by both outcomes. He let her in without comment and made tea, and they sat in a small parlor, and for a while Nora said nothing at all. Did you know, she asked finally. Know what specifically? Why Edmund left? Reverend Cole set down his cup. He looked at his hands. He was quiet for long enough that she had her answer before he spoke. You do know, she said. Nora, tell me. Her voice came out harder than she intended. I have been publicly humiliated in front of everyone I know for the second time in 3 years. I think I am owed the truth. He sighed. He was a man who believed in kindness over candor, which was usually a virtue and sometimes was not. Edmund's mother came to see me, he said, the week before the wedding. She had learned something about your past, about a time when you were very young. Nora went very still. She told Edmund, the Reverend continued carefully. She told him that if he married you, she would make certain the information became known publicly. She said it would ruin his family's reputation. And Edmund, he stopped. Edmund chose his reputation, Nora finished. Yes. The silence in the room was very complete. Outside, a night bird called once and went quiet. Nora had been 19 years old. She had been in love, or thought she was, with a young man from the next county who had left town before she could tell him anything that mattered. She had been alone and frightened, and Aunt Cecile had been the only person she told, the only person she asked for help, and the grief of it had lived inside her ever since, like a coal that never fully burned out. She had thought it was buried. She had thought no one else knew. And the first time, she said, William Garrett. William's mother had heard a rumor, a version of the same story distorted by the telling. She convinced him you were unsuitable. The Reverend looked pained. Nora, I want you to understand, these men did not leave because of who you are. They left because they were afraid. They left because someone gave them a reason. Yes, but the reason was a lie or close to one, and the fact that they accepted it so readily that they chose the easy path without even coming to speak to you directly. He shook his head. That is a reflection of their character, not yours. Nora sat with that for a moment. She had been asking herself for years what was wrong with her, what fault she carried that made men decide to go. And here was the answer, and it was nothing like what she had imagined. She had not been too much for them. She had not been too little. She had been a choice they could avoid making, and they had avoided it. She thought about that all the way home through the dark streets, and she thought about it while she lay awake in her bed, and by morning she had made her decision. Nah. She told Aunt Cecile first. Cecile listened without interrupting. When Nora finished, the older woman went to the kitchen and came back with a small leather journal, worn soft as skin from years of handling. This belonged to your mother, she said. Nora took it carefully. The cover was dark brown, creased along the spine. She kept it when she was young, before she married your father. Aunt Cecile sat beside her. She was not always the proper banker's wife people remember. When she was your age, she wanted more. Adventure. A life bigger than Silver Falls. She paused. She almost ran off to St. Louis once. Did you know that there was a musician? She was half in love with the idea of him. What stopped her? She met your father, and she loved him, and she chose stability, and I don't believe she regretted it. Cecile was quiet for a moment, but sometimes late at night I would catch her at the window, just looking out, with this expression I could never quite name. Nora opened the journal. Her mother's handwriting filled the pages, small, elegant, pressing forward, always to the right, as though the words were trying to outrun the hand that wrote them. I want to know what is over the next hill. One entry read, I want to go somewhere no one has decided yet who I am. Nora read it twice, then she closed the journal and held it in her lap. You think I should go, she said. I think you should choose, Aunt Cecile said. Not because your father says so, not because the town expects it, because you, Nora Calloway, want to. She met her niece's eyes. Whatever you decided should be yours. Nora looked at the journal, at her mother's words pressing forward through the page. Montana, she said quietly. I've never been anywhere. No, Cecile agreed. You haven't. That. She spent the next 2 days putting her life into a trunk. It was not as much as she expected. Some clothes sensible and plain, her mother's journal, a small portrait of her parents taken the year before her mother died. The practical things, needles and thread, a good knife, the emergency envelope of money her father pressed into her hands the morning of departure with instructions not to tell anyone about it. Edmund had not come to see her. She had not expected him to. On Wednesday evening, she sat with Aunt Cecile on the porch of the house where she had grown up, and they drank tea and watched the town go quiet around them, and neither of them tried to make it into something it wasn't. Write to me, Cecile said, every week. And if it's terrible, I'll figure it out. Nora leaned her head briefly against her aunt's shoulder. I've been figuring things out my whole life. Thursday morning came gray and cool. The stage depot smelled of horses and leather, and the particular anxiety of departure. Her father was there standing straight and awkward, in the way of a man who wanted to say something he hadn't practiced. He pressed the envelope into her hands. Emergency money, he said. Keep it hidden, just in case. Father, I know I haven't been. He stopped, started again. I loved your mother very much. I think I loved her so much there wasn't always enough left over. His voice was even, but his jaw was tight. I should have done better by you, Nora. She looked at him. This man she had spent most of her life trying to be enough for. I know you tried, she said, and she hugged him quickly before either of them could change their minds. The stage lurched forward into the morning light. Nora did not look back. The journey took 17 days. She had not understood, before she began it, what 2,000 miles actually meant in terms of the body. The stagecoach jolted and swayed over roads that grew rougher and more uncertain with every passing day. The trains were faster, but the stations were often bare wooden platforms in the middle of nothing. She learned to sleep sitting upright, to eat whatever was set in front of her without comment, to accept discomfort as a condition of travel rather than an aberration. The other passengers came and went, a hardware salesman with a permanent cough, a young couple moving their family west with more hope than supplies, a silent old man who read the same Bible page for 3 days and never turned it. Nora watched them all and said little and looked out the window at a country changing beneath her. The flat fields of Illinois gave way to the long plains of Iowa, then the wide open grasslands farther west, where the sky was so much larger than anything she had ever stood under, that the first time she stepped out of the stage and looked up, she felt almost frightened by the scale of it. Then the land began to rise slowly at first, and then dramatically folding itself into hills and valleys, and eventually into something that could only be called mountains, serious, snow-capped, and indifferent to human opinion. The air changed. It grew thinner, drier, carrying the smell of pine and something mineral and cold that she had no name for. She read Ethan Voss's letters again on the long stretches. She had memorized them by the second day, but she read them anyway, trying to find the man between the words. I will be plain with you, because I haven't got patience for anything else. She wondered what had made him that way, whether he had always been spare and direct, or whether loss had stripped him of the ability to pretend. She wondered about his wife, what she had looked like, what she had laughed at, how she had died. She wondered if she would be a ghost in another woman's house, or whether she would find a way to make it her own. By the time the stage pulled into Millstone Creek, Montana territory on a Tuesday afternoon in July, Nora Calloway was thinner, dusty, stiff-jointed, and more wide awake than she had felt in years. The town was small. One main street, a general store with a hand-lettered sign of saloon, a church that leaned slightly to the left. A few houses scattered back from the road. Mountains visible in every direction, the nearest of them so close they seemed to be listening. She climbed down from the stage and stood on the packed dirt street and tried to get her legs to remember how to be still. You, Nora Calloway. She turned. The man standing behind her was taller than she had pictured. Broad through the shoulders, lean through the body, with dark hair that had gray threaded through it at the temples and along the jaw. His face was weathered and angular, the kind of face that had spent a great deal of time outdoors and very little of it smiling. His eyes were the color of deep water and just as difficult to read. She realized, looking at her the way a man assesses a situation rather than a person. I'm Nora, she said. You must be Ethan Voss. He nodded once, a long, slow look that moved from her face to her single trunk to her face again. You're smaller than I expected, he said. She met his gaze without flinching. Is that a problem? Something shifted at the edge of his expression. Not a smile exactly, more like the possibility of one considered and then set aside. Depends, he said. Can you work? I can learn. He picked up her trunk without asking and carried it toward a wagon hitched at the end of the street. Wagon's this way, he said. Long ride. Get in when you're ready. She stood for a moment watching him walk away. Then she picked up her small bag and followed. The ride to the ranch took 4 hours. Ethan drove in silence for the first 20 minutes, watching the trail ahead with the focused attention of a man who had driven it 1,000 times and still took it seriously. Nora sat beside him on the wagon bench and watched the country open up around them. Rolling grassland going gold in the summer heat, stands of pine on the higher ground, the mountains filling the northern horizon. How far is the ranch? She asked finally. 4 hours, maybe 5. You mentioned that. I did. She looked at him. He kept his eyes on the trail. Mr. Voss, she said, I've traveled 17 days to get here. I understand this isn't a social occasion, but we are going to be living on the same property, and presumably we will need to speak to each other at some point. Could we manage a few words now? Or would you prefer I wait until we're officially married? He was quiet for a long moment. Then what do you want to know? Anything. Tell me about the ranch. 300 acres, mostly cattle, some horses. I've got one hired hand named Walt Briggs. He's reliable. The house is small but sound. The winters are harder than anything you're used to. What else? He glanced at her. Then he looked back at the trail and said, I had a wife, Eliza. She's been gone 3 years. You should know that I'm not looking to replace what we had. He paused. I'm looking for a partner, someone steady. I understand. I don't think you do yet. But he said it without harshness, more like a man stating a fact he'd had to state before. You'll understand better after a winter. They rode in silence for a while after that. The land was beautiful in a way that asked nothing of you. No admiration, no response, just acceptance. Nora watched it go by and thought about the word partner, about how different it was from beloved or sweetheart or any of the words that had been offered to her before and proven to mean nothing. Partner was a word that required something. Maybe that was the point. Tell me about Eliza, she said. Ethan's hands tightened slightly on the reins. Then they relaxed. What do you want to know? Whatever you want to say. He was quiet long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, she was from Virginia originally, came west with her parents when she was 16. I met her at a harvest social in '74, and she told me within 10 minutes of meeting me that I was the most direct person she'd ever encountered, and she didn't know whether to find it refreshing or alarming. The ghost of something moved across his face. She decided refreshing. She sounds like someone with good judgment. She had better judgment than anyone I've known. He was quiet again. She died in the summer, 3 years ago, August. The fever your letter said. He said nothing to that, just watch the road. They stopped at a creek about 2 hours in to water the horses. Ethan helped her down from the wagon without ceremony, his hands efficient and impersonal, and she found a flat rock near the bank and sat while the horses drank. He came and stood nearby, and after a moment he held out a cloth bundle without comment. Inside was bread and dried beef, plain and sufficient. She was too hungry to be self-conscious about eating, and she didn't try to be. "You said you can learn," Ethan said. He was standing with his back to the creek watching her eat. "What do you know already?" "Basic cooking, though I'd call it competent rather than good. I can sew. I know how to keep a household. I've never worked a ranch." She paused. "I'm not afraid of hard work. I want you to know that." "Why?" She looked at him. "Because I've spent the last 10 years being underestimated. I'd rather it not happen here." He studied her for a moment. His expression was difficult to read, not unkind exactly, but guarded in the deep way of someone who has learned that openness costs more than it returns. "My father drank," he said, not as a confession, but as a piece of information the way he offered most things. "After my mother left when I was 12, he worked himself to death and cursed her with his last breath. I decided early on I didn't want to be that kind of man. I don't always succeed, but I treat." He paused. "I'm telling you because you're about to marry me, and you deserve to know the inventory." Nora looked at him, at this spare, weathered, closed-off man who had just handed her a piece of himself as matter-of-factly as he'd handed her the bread. "My mother died when I was 12, she said. "My father loved her so much he didn't have much left over after she was gone. I spent most of my childhood trying to be enough to bring him back." She met his eyes. "I'm telling you that because you told me something true, and it seemed fair to return it." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once slowly and turned back to the horses. "We should keep moving," he said. "Long way to go before dark." They crested a low hill as the sun was beginning its long western descent, and below them the ranch spread out in the evening light, a sturdy log house, a large barn, a split-rail corral where 3 horses moved lazily, a kitchen garden to one side, mountains rising behind everything catching the last gold of the day. It was not beautiful in the decorative sense. It was beautiful the way useful things are beautiful, the beauty of something made to last. "Home," Ethan said. Just the one word, and it held something she hadn't heard from him yet. Not much, but something. A figure emerged from the barn at the sound of the wagon, a young man, maybe 25, with sandy hair and an easy grin that he deployed immediately upon seeing Nora. "Boss, you made it back." He jogged over, then stopped, and the grin widened into something that could only be described as delighted. "Well, you must be the bride." "Nora Calloway," she said. "And you're Walt Briggs?" "Yes, ma'am, in the flesh." He swept his hat off with a small bow. "Ethan failed to mention you were—" "Walt." Ethan's voice was flat. "Capable looking?" Walt finished without missing a beat. "I was going to say capable looking." Nora laughed. It surprised her, a real laugh, the first in days, maybe longer. It felt strange and good. "Take the horses," Ethan said. He climbed down and offered Nora his hand. "Yes, sir." Walt winked at Nora as he took the reins. "Welcome to Millstone, Miss Calloway. Try not to let him scare you off before Sunday." The house was small and scrupulously clean. A main room with a stone fireplace and a long wooden table. A kitchen with a cast-iron stove. A single bedroom off the back, which she would use. Ethan would sleep in the barn until the wedding, which was a practical arrangement and a respectful one. "It ain't decorated," he said, standing in the middle of the main room with the look of a man assessing his own life and finding it spare. "Eliza used to have things, dried flowers, a piece of lace at the window. I never kept them up after she passed." "It's fine," Nora said, and she meant it. The room was plain, but it was clean and it was solid. She could work with solid. "Preacher comes through Millstone Creek every other Sunday. That's 11 days from now, unless you want longer." She looked at him. 11 days is fine." He nodded, set her trunk down by the bedroom door. "There's food in the kitchen. Get some rest." He moved toward the door. "Ethan." He stopped. "Thank you," she said, "for coming to meet me, for being straight with me on the road." She paused. "I know this isn't what either of us imagined, but I intend to make it work." He stood in the doorway for a moment. Outside, the light had gone soft and golden, and the mountains were turning the color of old copper. "I intend to as well," he said, and then he was gone. Nora stood alone in the house that was not yet hers and looked at the bare window where a piece of lace had once hung. She thought, "I can work with this." She thought, "I can work with him." She wasn't sure yet if that was enough, but she had come 2,000 miles on less certainty than that, and she was still standing. "Yeah." The first week was the hardest physical experience of her life. She learned the wood stove by burning 3 batches of biscuits in 1 pot of stew before arriving at something edible. She learned to haul water from the well, to feed the chickens, to read the garden's needs by the color and texture of the soil. Her hands blistered, and she wrapped them at night and did not mention them. Ethan watched her without commenting on her failures or her progress. He simply worked alongside her in the mornings before riding out to the cattle, and in the evenings he came in for supper and ate whatever she put in front of him and said nothing disparaging about it, even when she could tell it wasn't right. What was easier? He talked constantly cheerfully, offering instruction whenever she seemed to need it and stepping back when she didn't. He had a good eye for what people needed without being asked. On the fourth morning, Ethan stopped her in the yard. "You're working too hard," he said. "I'm fine. You're not sleeping enough either. I can hear you moving around after midnight." She looked at him. "Are you sleeping?" "That's not the question." "It seems like the same question." She kept her voice even. "I'm adjusting. It takes time." He studied her face for a moment. Something in him seemed to be working through a calculation. Then he said, "Take the day, rest," and walked away before she could argue. She spent the morning sitting on the back step in the sun with her mother's journal, reading pages she hadn't reached yet. Her mother had written about the summer. She was 28, the same age Nora was now, and the entry was so immediate it felt almost like conversation. "I think sometimes," her mother had written, "that I am waiting for my real life to begin, as though this one is a rehearsal. But what if it isn't? What if this is all the time I get and I am spending it waiting?" Nora sat with those words for a long time. That afternoon, she found Walt repairing a fence near the barn and went to watch him work. He was methodical about it, careful, talking the whole time in his comfortable way about nothing in particular. "Tell me about Eliza," she said. Walt's hands stilled for a moment. Then he went back to work. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to say." He was quiet for a moment, the way people are when they're deciding how honest to be. "She was something special," he said finally. "Tough, not like she had to prove it, just like it was in her. She could ride better than most men I know. Smarter than Ethan, though he'd never say so." Walt smiled at something in the middle distance. "She kept this place alive. Not just the work, the heart of it. After she died, it was like the whole ranch went quiet." "What happened?" Nora asked. Ethan said fever. Walt's hands stilled again. This time the pause was longer. He drove another nail into the post with more force than was strictly necessary. "That's what he tells people," Walt said. Nora looked at him. He met her eyes briefly, then looked away. "It ain't my story to tell. That's between you and him." He straightened up. "But I'll say this, Ethan Voss isn't a man who closes himself off for no reason. Whatever he's carrying, it's real. And it's heavy." He picked up his tools. "Be patient with him." She thought about that all afternoon while she weeded the garden Ethan had told her to leave alone, and then weeded it anyway because it needed doing. That evening when Ethan came in from the north pasture and sat down across from her at the long table, she served the stew she had gotten right on the third try and poured the coffee and sat down herself. He ate. She watched him. "You weeded the garden," he said. "It needed it." He looked up from his bowl. Something almost amused moved through his expression. "I told you to rest." "I rested in the morning. The garden needed attention in the afternoon. I made a judgment call." "Did you?" "I did." He ate another spoonful. "Then it needed weeding." "I know." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My wife couldn't cook when we married. Said she'd been raised to manage a household, not run one. Took her 2 years to get the stew right." He pushed the bowl back slightly. "Yours is better than hers was at the start." Nora looked at him. Was that a compliment? It was a fact. But the corner of his mouth moved, just slightly, just for a moment. She decided that was enough for one day. And it rained the evening of the 9th day. Not a storm, just a quiet, steady rain that came in from the mountains and settled over the ranch like a gray blanket, softening the edges of everything. Walt had gone to town for supplies and wasn't back yet. The cattle were settled. The house was still. Nora came out onto the back porch after supper, drawn by the sound of the rain on the roof, and found Ethan already there. He was sitting on the porch, step elbows on his knees, looking out at the pasture where the grass was bending in the rain. He didn't look up when she came out. She went to the kitchen and came back with 2 cups of coffee. She set one on the step beside him without saying anything. He picked it up without looking at her. She sat in the wooden chair at the edge of the porch and listened to the rain. They sat like that for a long time. 5 minutes, maybe 10. The rain continued steady and indifferent, and the mountains were invisible now behind the clouds. The world had contracted to the porch, the step, the sound of water on wood. Ethan did not leave. That was the thing she noticed. He had the habit of removing himself from rooms, from conversations, from anything that edged toward feeling. But tonight he sat with his coffee and looked out at the rain and didn't go anywhere. She didn't say anything. She just sat with him in the quiet. After a long time, he said, "The first year after she died, I couldn't stand to hear the rain." His voice was low, not quite to her and not quite to himself. "She used to like it, used to make coffee and sit exactly where you're sitting." Nora didn't move. "I tore that chair off the porch the November after she died," he said. "Put it in the barn, didn't bring it back out until spring." He was quiet. "I don't know why I brought it out." "Maybe you were ready," Nora said quietly. He looked at his coffee. "Maybe." They sat until the rain began to lighten and the mountains reappeared dark and massive against the clearing sky. Then Ethan stood and picked up both cups and went inside without another word. But he had stayed. That was the thing. He had stayed. The day before the wedding, a stranger came to the ranch. Nora saw her first, a young woman, maybe 20, riding a gray horse down the trail from the northern hills at a pace that suggested she was not arriving casually. She was dark-haired, thin, wearing a plain brown dress that had seen hard use, and when she got close enough, Nora could see that she was afraid. Not startled afraid, the deeper kind, the kind that lives behind the eyes. Walt came out of the barn when he heard the horse. Ethan was in the north pasture. Nora stepped off the porch and walked toward the rider as she dismounted. "Can I help you?" Nora asked. The young woman hesitated. She looked at Nora, then at Walt, then back at Nora. "I'm looking for work," she said. "Any kind, cooking, cleaning, mending. I'm good with horses." A pause. "I won't be any trouble." "What's your name?" Walt asked. "Iris," she said. "Iris Mathis." Nora looked at her, at the too careful way she held herself, at the shadows under her eyes, at the horse which was a good animal, too good for a woman passing herself off as a drifter. "Where are you from?" Nora asked. "Up north," the young woman said, vague, careful. "Are you in trouble?" Iris met her eyes for just a moment. Something in that brief contact said yes, but not the kind you mean. "No," she said, "just looking for work." Nora studied her for a long moment. She thought about her own life, about the moments when she had needed someone to simply take her at her word, about the difference between a person who was hiding something and a person who was hiding from something. "Walt," she said without looking away from Iris, "is there enough in the pantry for 3 for supper?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then Miss Mathis will stay tonight. She can talk to Ethan in the morning about whether there's work." She looked at Iris again. "The barn's dry. You can put your horse in the second stall." Iris stared at her. The careful composure slipped for just a moment, and underneath it, Nora saw something raw and exhausted and enormously relieved. "Thank you," Iris said quietly. "I won't be any trouble." That evening, Nora told Ethan about their guest over supper. He said nothing for a long moment, just turned his coffee cup in his hands. "Mathis," he said finally. "Don't know the name." Nora said nothing. She had looked at Iris across the supper table all evening and noticed 3 things: the way Iris flinched slightly at loud sounds, the way she watched the road every time a horse passed in the distance, and the small silver brooch pinned at her collar, expensive, distinctive, utterly at odds with her plain dress and story of drifting. She had not yet said any of this to Ethan. She wasn't sure why, only that something told her to wait, to watch, to give the young woman one more night of safety before whatever it was caught up with her. Outside, the stars had come out over the mountains in their thousands, indifferent and permanent. Tomorrow there would be a wedding. The day after that, whatever came. Nora blew out the lamp and lay in the dark, listening to the ranch settle around her. The creak of wood cooling the distant sound of cattle, the wind through the grass. She thought, "This is real. This place, this life." She thought, "I am exactly where I chose to be." And for the first time in longer than she could remember, that felt like enough. The wedding was simple. Reverend Halloway arrived just before noon on Sunday, a round man with kind eyes who had clearly performed many ceremonies in many rough circumstances and found each of them moving regardless. Walt served as witness. Iris, who had been given a narrow cot in the storeroom and had not yet said anything more about where she came from, stood near the door with her hands folded, watching. Ethan and Nora stood in the main room of the house, the morning light coming through the bare window, the smell of coffee still in the air because Nora had made it and then forgotten to drink it. "Do you, Ethan Voss, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" He was looking at her when he said, "I do." Not past her, not at the wall, not with the expression of a man fulfilling an obligation. At her. It was the first time she had seen him look at anything without that watchful distance in his eyes. "Do you, Nora Calloway, take this man?" She thought about Edmund, about the flowers, the flattery, the beautiful lie of it. She thought about standing in the back room of the church in Silver Falls while the bells rang and her life fell apart for the second time. Then she looked at Ethan Voss, this difficult, guarded, honest man, and said, "I do. You may kiss the bride." He stepped toward her. There was nothing practice about it. He cupped her face briefly in both hands, and the kiss was quiet and careful. And it lasted 3 seconds and meant more than anything she could remember. "Congratulations," Walt said, grinning wide. "About damn time." "Language," Ethan said. "Sorry, ma'am." Walt didn't look sorry at all. "About darn time." Nora laughed. Iris smiled small and private from the doorway. Man. By the afternoon of their wedding day, Harlan Dade had ridden to the ranch. He came alone, which was unusual, with two of his men hanging back on the far side of the fence line. He was a big man, older than Ethan by perhaps 15 years, with the kind of face that had once been handsome and had been replaced over time by the face he'd actually earned, heavy-jowled, careful-eyed, built for calculation. Ethan came off the porch to meet him. "Just wanted to congratulate the newlyweds," Dade said. He tipped his hat toward Nora, who had come to stand in the doorway. "Heard you found yourself a bride, Voss. Thought it was only neighborly to stop in." "Your property line is half a mile back," Ethan said. "This isn't a social call." Dade smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I'm a man of business, Voss, you know that. And the business is this." He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded paper. "County clerk's office sent this over last week. Seems there's a matter of unpaid land taxes on the north parcel, 3 years in arrears by their count." Ethan took the paper. He read it once without moving. Then he looked up. "This is wrong," he said. "The county's records say otherwise." Dade's voice was pleasant, unhurried. "Now, I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here as a neighbor offering a solution. That north pasture, the one with the spring, I've been wanting to purchase it for years. You know that. I'll give you fair price. You settle the debt with the county pocket, the difference nobody has to get unpleasant about it. That land has been mine for 12 years. The county may see it differently." Dade shrugged. 30 days, Voss. After that, I'm told the county will move to assess. Whatever happens then is out of my hands." He replaced his hat. "Think on it." He turned his horse and rode back toward the fence line where his men waited. Ethan stood in the yard with the paper in his hand for a long moment after Dade was gone. His face had gone very still, the kind of stillness that is not calm. Nora came down from the porch and stood beside him. "Let me read it." He handed it over without comment. She read through the document twice, the careful legal language, the claim of arrears, the signature of 1 H.M. Brierley County Clerk, Millstone Creek District. "Is there a county clerk by that name?" she asked. "There is. Do you have your tax records, your payment receipts?" Ethan looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes, not surprise exactly. More like recalibration. "In the house, in the strongbox. Then we get them out and we compare them to this." She handed the paper back. "Either the county made an error or someone at the county made an error on purpose. Both are provable." She paused. "Which do you think it is?" His jaw was tight. "Dade has been buying influence in this county for 5 years. He owns the banker and 2 of the county commissioners." He looked at the retreating dust from Dade's horses. "A county clerk is a small investment. Then those receipts alone won't be enough." "No. What would be?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said without looking at her, "Eliza found something. 3 years ago, before she died. She'd been looking into the land records going back 10 years. Dade's purchases, the transfers, the grants. She thought she'd found evidence that he'd been falsifying deeds for years. Not just my land. 6 properties across the district." He stopped. "She never got to report it." Nora looked at him carefully. "You said she died of fever." He was quiet. "Ethan." He turned to look at the mountains. The afternoon light was long and golden on the grass. "She went riding," he said, "one morning in August. Said she had an errand in town." His voice was flat in the way of a man who has controlled this telling many times. "She never came home. I found her at the bottom of the eastern ravine. Her horse had been shot." Nora absorbed this. "You know who did it. I know who ordered it. And you couldn't prove it." Dade owns the circuit judge and 2 of the commissioners. His foreman at the time, a man named Cole, who has since moved on, was the one who... He stopped. "I had nothing but my own word and a dead wife in a town that was afraid of Silas Garrett's money." He had said Garrett. She filed it away without commenting. Dade, she thought, not Garrett, same man, different telling or a slip. She didn't push it yet. "What did Eliza find?" Nora asked. "The evidence, where is it?" I don't know. She never told me everything. She was careful about it, didn't want to put me in danger. His hands were tight at his sides. She hid whatever she gathered somewhere on the property. I've looked. For 3 years I've looked. He turned back to face Nora. I've never found it. Nora stood in the yard of this ranch on her wedding day and looked at the man she had married and thought, of course. Of course this is what there is. Of course it couldn't be simple. Then she thought, good, I don't know what to do with simple. Amandawaka? Then we'll find it, she said. Ethan looked at her. You've been looking alone, she said. 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. And I'm new here. I'll look at the same places you've already looked and see them differently. She met his gaze. We have 30 days before Dade moves on the property. Let's use them. He stared at her for a long, measuring moment. You weren't supposed to land in the middle of this, he said. Too late, Nora said. I already have. Bye. She started with the house. While Ethan and Walt managed the cattle work, Nora went through every room, every drawer, every possible concealment in the log house looking for anything Eliza might have hidden. She pressed floorboards and checked behind the stone facing of the fireplace and looked in the lining of the curtains she found folded in a trunk. Nothing. She moved to the kitchen garden where the beds were carefully marked and some of the stones were large enough to hide a box beneath. Nothing. The 3rd day she was in the barn methodically working through the stalls when she became aware that Iris was watching her from the doorway. You're looking for something, Iris said. It wasn't a question. Nora sat back on her heels and looked at the young woman. She had been here 4 days now, working quietly and well, feeding the chickens, mending tack, making herself useful without being asked. She asked for nothing. She watched the road. Yes, Nora said. Iris came into the barn and crouched down across from her, examining the same section of packed earth floor. Something hidden. Something Ethan's wife hid before she died. Iris was quiet for a moment. Eliza, she said. Her voice was careful. Nora looked at her. You know the name. Everyone in the district knows the name. Iris met her eyes briefly. People liked her. She was kind. You're not from up north, Nora said. Not in the way you said. Iris didn't answer immediately. She looked at her hands. Iris, Nora said. I don't know why you're here and I haven't pressed you on it because you seem to need time. But I think you know something about what's happening to this ranch and I think you came here for a reason. She kept her voice even. I'm not going to report you anywhere or judge you for anything. But I need to know. The silence stretched out. Outside, Walt was somewhere near the corral talking to the horses in his comfortable way. The mountains were visible through the barn door, steady and enormous in the afternoon light. Iris said, my name is Iris Dade. Nora said nothing. Harlan Dade is my father. Iris looked up, and her expression was a complicated mixture of things, guilt and defiance, and an exhaustion that went deeper than travel. I heard him talking to his foreman last week about the tax papers, about what he planned to do if Voss refused to sell. Her jaw was set hard. About what he did to Eliza Voss 3 years ago. Nora kept her breathing even. He didn't name Cole directly, Iris said. He doesn't anymore, but I've heard things over the years. I knew what happened to her wasn't fever. I've known for 2 years and Her voice broke slightly. I told myself it wasn't my business, that I didn't know for certain, that there was nothing I could do. She looked at the floor. I've been telling myself that long enough. What changed, Nora asked. He threatened you. Iris said it simply. Not just the land. He said if Voss didn't take the deal, he'd make sure the new wife understood that Montana was an unforgiving place. She looked up. I've convinced myself of a lot of things. I couldn't convince myself of that. They looked at each other across the hard-packed earth of the barn floor. You came here to warn us, Nora said. I came here to help. Iris looked down at the ground again. If there's anything to find, it's here somewhere. My father tore the house apart after Eliza died, looking for whatever she'd gathered. He didn't find it either, which means it's hidden well. Then we keep looking, Nora said. And Iris and Nora searched every day for a week. They developed a system Iris would describe from memory, everything she'd overheard about the original investigation, and Nora would work through the property methodically section by section. Walt knew they were looking and helped when he could without asking too many questions. Ethan said nothing but watched them with an expression that had something uncertain in it, something he hadn't decided yet. The evening of the 7th day, Nora told him about Iris. They were sitting at the long table after supper, the lamp turned low, the night pressing against the windows. Ethan listened without interrupting. His face gave nothing away. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. She's Dade's daughter, he said finally. Yes. And you trust her. I think she's scared and ashamed and trying to do something harder than anything her father ever did. Nora held his gaze. And yes, I trust her. Ethan looked at the table. The lamplight caught the lines of his face, the jaw, the brow, the marks that grief and weather had made there. She was 17 when Eliza died, he said. I remember seeing her once in town a year after. She looked at me and walked the other way. He was quiet. I thought it was because she knew. I thought it was guilt. It was, Nora said. She's been living with it. He stood up and went to the window and stood looking out at the dark ranch. The mountains were invisible now, just darkness and the sound of wind in the grass. Eliza would tell me to let her stay, he said. I think that too. I'm not Eliza. His voice was rough. I know. Nora came to stand beside him. But you're the man she chose. And she chose well. He turned to look at her. Something cracked open briefly in his expression, a grief that was real and deep and had no bottom to it. Then it closed again and he turned back to the window. Let her stay, he said. They found it on a Tuesday. Iris had mentioned in passing that her father's men had been thorough about the house and the barn, but had not torn up the floor of the old shelter, a small half-collapsed structure at the eastern edge of the property used for wintering horses before Ethan had built the main barn. Nobody used it anymore. The floor was compacted earth and old straw. Nora went there alone in the early morning before anyone else was up. She worked methodically from the east wall, pressing the floor with the heel of her boot at regular intervals, listening for the hollow sound that would mean something underneath. She found it 3 feet from the south wall. A tin box buried about 18 inches down, wrapped in oilskin that had kept it dry through 3 Montana winters. She pulled it free of the earth and wiped it down with the edge of her apron and sat cross-legged on the old straw floor with her hands shaking slightly. She opened it. Inside 7 folded documents. Land records, deed transfers, grant approvals dated across a span of 10 years with careful notations in a small, precise hand she didn't recognize. Eliza's hand, she realized. Annotations, cross-references, dates that didn't match signatures that appeared on documents where they shouldn't. A paper trail of systematic fraud that had dispossessed 11 families across the district over a decade. And underneath the documents, a letter, sealed, addressed in that same small, precise hand to Ethan. Nora held it for a long time. Then she put it with the documents, closed the box, and carried it back to the house. Boy. Ethan was at the table with his coffee when she walked in. He looked up and saw the box and went very still. She set it on the table in front of him. I found it, she said, in the old shelter under the floor. She paused. The documents are inside. They're what we needed. There's enough here to take to a proper territorial court. She paused again. And there's a letter. He looked at the box. He didn't move. It's addressed to you, Nora said. I didn't open it. He put his hands flat on the table. He breathed out slowly. Then he reached forward and opened the box. He went through the documents first methodically, his face giving nothing away. Then his hands found the letter. He turned it over once and looked at his name in her handwriting, and something happened in his face that Nora had no words for. She said, I'll be outside. She went out and sat on the porch step and watched the mountains for what felt like a very long time. Walt came by and she shook her head slightly, and he nodded and went back to his work without a word. Iris appeared at the corner of the barn, and Nora shook her head again, and Iris disappeared. The ranch went quiet around her. When Ethan came outside, she didn't look at him right away. She heard him sit down on the step below her, the wood settling under his weight. She waited. She knew, he said. His voice was rough in a way she hadn't heard before. She wrote it in March, 2 months before she died. She said she knew it might be dangerous, that she'd hidden the documents somewhere safe. He stopped. She said if he found them before I did, if something happened to her. He stopped again. Nora waited. She said? He pressed his fist briefly against his mouth. Then she said, don't stay in the dark for me. Don't stop living because I'm gone. I didn't love you that way, and you know it. Find someone steady. Let yourself live again. The morning light was full, now warm and clear, the shadows retreating toward the mountains. Somewhere in the north pasture, cattle moved through the grass. Ethan was not crying, but he was close in the way of a man who has not cried in 3 years and has forgotten how it's done. Nora reached down and put her hand over his fist. She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. She just kept her hand there, and after a moment, he turned his hand over and held hers. They sat like that for a long time. Yeah. She sent Walt to town that afternoon. She gave him two things: a sealed letter addressed to Sheriff Amos Pratt, with a brief account of what they'd found and a request that he come to the ranch as soon as possible, and the list of documents copied in her own hand with Eliza's annotations transcribed beside them. Keep it separate, she told Walt. If something happens to the original, the copy goes to the territorial capital, directly to the circuit judge, not the county. Walt took both without argument. He was a man who asked fewer questions than he had opinions, and right now his opinions were all pointed the same direction. Boss knows you're doing this, he asked. Yes, it was almost true. She had told Ethan she was sending a message to Pratt. She had not told him about the copy. The distinction felt important. Be back by dark, she said. Walt was back by dark. He'd spoken to Pratt. The sheriff had read the letter and said nothing for a long moment, and then said he'd be out in the morning. That night, Nora and Ethan sat on the porch after supper, and she told him about the copy. He listened. Then he said, "You sent it before you told me." "Yes." "Why?" "Because you would have argued." She looked at him steadily. "And because Eliza spent 2 years gathering those documents, and she died before she could use them. I wasn't going to leave the only copy somewhere a dead man could burn it." He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she wasn't sure which way it would go. Then he said, "She would have done the same thing." "I know," Nora said. "I figured." He looked at her. Really looked the way he sometimes did when he thought she wasn't watching, with something open and uncertain and cautious. Like a man who has been told something good and doesn't quite trust it yet. "Nora," he said. "Ethan, He stopped. "Then thank you for finding it, for—" He stopped again. "You don't have to," she said. "I know. I want to." He looked out at the dark. "She told me to live again." "I know. I've been trying to figure out what that looks like." He turned to face her. "I'm starting to think it looks like this." She looked back at him across the porch in the dark, with the mountains invisible behind the clouds and the sound of Walt's voice from the barn as he settled the horses for the night. She thought yes. She thought me too. She said, "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be complicated." He almost smiled. "You have a remarkable gift for understatement." "I've been told." She stood up. "Good night, Ethan." "Good night," he said, and he watched her go inside with an expression she couldn't name but was beginning to recognize. Pratt arrived the next morning. Sheriff Amos Pratt was a man of middle age and deliberate movement, with a weathered face that gave very little away and watchful eyes that gave away even less. He had served as sheriff of the Millstone Creek District for 11 years. He arrived alone, which Nora had not expected. He sat at the long table and read through the original documents from Eliza's tin box without comment. He took his time. He was thorough. When he finished, he looked up. "I've been waiting 3 years for this," he said. Ethan looked at him. "You think I didn't know?" Pratt's voice was even. "I've known Harlan Dade is crooked since before Eliza Voss died. I've known what Cole did and why." He set the papers down carefully. "What I didn't have was enough to put in front of a territorial judge that Dade couldn't buy his way out of. His county commissioner connections, they run deep. I needed something airtight." "You could have told me that," Ethan said. His voice had an edge. "And what would you have done?" Pratt looked at him steadily. "You'd have ridden to Dade's ranch with a rifle and saved us all the paperwork." A pause. "I needed the documents, Voss. Not a dead rancher." The silence was taut. Nora said, "You have them now." Pratt looked at her. There was something in his expression, not quite gratitude and not quite appraisal, something in between. "I do." He looked at the documents again. 11 families, 10 years. If even half of these transfers hold up under examination. He shook his head. "It's not just Dade. It's Brierly at the county clerk's office, and likely one of the commissioners." "What do you need?" Nora asked. "Time. And the original documents with me under lock at the sheriff's office." He looked at Ethan. "And your testimony about the tax papers Dade served. That's attempted fraud." He paused. "And if we can get his daughter to testify about what she's overheard." He had done his research. Nora kept her face still. "Iris Dade is here voluntarily," Nora said. "She came to warn us. She'll testify if she's protected." Pratt nodded slowly. "I can get her protection in writing from the territorial prosecutor's office. That's not nothing." He stood up. "Give me 3 days to get word to the circuit judge. Dade doesn't know about the documents yet, or if he does, he doesn't know you have them. We have a window." "What if he moves before 3 days?" Ethan asked. "Then we deal with it." Pratt looked at him. "I've been waiting 3 years to have something to work with, Voss. Don't waste it by doing something I can't help you with." Ethan held his gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded. Pratt took the documents, left a receipt, and rode out. In the yard watching him go, Walt said cheerfully, "So that went well." "Shut up, Walt," Ethan said. "Yes, sir." Walt was beaming. "Shutting up now." Bam. Nora told Iris that afternoon. She found her in the kitchen garden, working the rows with the steady concentration of someone who needed her hands to stay busy. Nora sat on the fence at the garden's edge and watched her for a moment. "Iris." The young woman looked up. "I found what I was looking for," Nora said. "The documents Eliza hid." She paused. "She documented your father's operation thoroughly. Every transaction, every forged deed, going back 10 years. Iris went still in the middle of the row. Her hands were dirty up to the wrists. She looked at them. "I know what he's done," she said quietly. "Do you know all of it?" A long pause. "Eliza Voss," Iris said. "Yes, I know." Nora watched her. "I'm not asking you to do anything you're not willing to do, but Sheriff Pratt is coming tomorrow. And if this is going to end, if it's going to end with your father answering to a real judge instead of the ones he's bought, then a witness who was in that house, who heard things," she stopped. "You'd be protected. Pratt can get something formal from the territorial prosecutor." Iris was looking at her hands. "You don't have to decide now," Nora said. "I've already decided." Her voice was very quiet. "I decided when I wrote here." She looked up. "I've been trying to figure out if I had the nerve." She breathed out slowly. "I think about Eliza Voss, about someone who found out what was happening and tried to stop it and died for it. And I think about myself sitting in my father's house knowing what I knew." She pressed her lips together. "I was a coward for 2 years." "You were young," Nora said. "That's an explanation. It's not an excuse." Nora looked at her. At this young woman standing in someone else's garden, her father's crimes written across her face in the particular way of people who have carried guilt long enough that it's changed the shape of their expression. "You're here now," Nora said. Iris nodded once. "You went back to work." Nora sat on the fence a while longer and listened to the mountains and the wind. Yeah. In the evening, Nora found Ethan at the eastern edge of the property. He was standing at the top of a low ridge, looking down into a ravine where the afternoon shadows were deep. He didn't move when she came up beside him. She understood after a moment what she was looking at. This was where Eliza had died. She stood beside him and said nothing. The ravine was not dramatic, just a break in the land, maybe 20 feet deep with scrub pine along the edges and a hawk turning slow circles above the far hill. The wind moved through the grass in long silver waves. "I come here sometimes," Ethan said. "I know. I used to come every day. Tell her about the cattle, the weather, things I'd normally have told her over supper." He paused. "I told her about you today." Nora waited. "Told her you argued with me about the garden before we were even married. That you look at this place the way she did, like you see what it can be, not just what it is." His voice went rough. "I told her I thought she'd like you." "I think I'd like her too," Nora said. He was quiet for a moment. "I'm not the same man I was when she was alive. She got the better version, younger, less broken." "I don't need the earlier version," Nora said. "I'm serious." "So am I." She held his gaze. "I didn't come here looking for a man without scars. I came looking for someone honest." She paused. "You're the most honest person I've ever met." He held her gaze. Then he nodded once and filed something away, not dismissing it, but keeping it the way you keep something that matters. They walked back through the long grass as the first stars came out. Their arms brushed occasionally. Neither of them commented. Boom. On the second day after Pratt's visit, Harlan Dade sent a message. Walt brought it in and set it on the table. Ethan read it and handed it to Nora. "Voss, word has reached me that you've been speaking with the sheriff about certain documents. I want you to consider carefully what you're doing. I have been patient for 3 years. My patience is not unlimited. You have 24 hours to surrender the papers or come to an arrangement. After that, the consequences are out of my hands. H. Dade." "He knows," Nora said. "He knows something. Doesn't know what we have or how much. He'll move tonight. A man like that, when things are slipping, he doesn't wait another 24 hours. She looked at Ethan. "We need to send word to Pratt now." "Walt, I'll go," Walt said. He was already at the door. "Take the fast horse," Ethan said, "and don't take the main road." Walt was gone in a minute. Iris stood in the kitchen doorway. She came in and crossed her arms, pale but steady. "What do we do?" "We prepare," Nora said. She said it before Ethan could, and she saw him register it not with irritation but something closer to relief. The relief of not being the only one holding the weight. "Bar the windows. Load the rifles. Check the cellar latch." He looked at Nora. If it goes badly, that's where you go. I'm not. If it goes badly, he said, I need to know you're safe. Let me do what I'm good at. You do what you're good at. We don't have to do the same thing to be working together. She looked at him. Fair, she said. Yeah. The afternoon passed slowly. They moved through the preparations with quiet efficiency. Ethan checked and loaded the rifles. Nora fitted the bar across the front door. Iris filled every pot and basin in the kitchen with water. Nobody said anything unnecessary. By evening, the sky had clouded and the light was gray and flat. Nora was setting the table for supper. Force of habit, the anchoring normalcy of plates and cups, when Ethan came to stand in the kitchen doorway and watched her. Sit down, she said without looking up. He sat. She brought the food and they ate the three of them in the lamplight while the sky darkened outside. The stew was right. She'd finally gotten the balance right. After a while, Ethan said, when I was 19, my father told me I'd amount to nothing. Said it the way men say things they believe, not cruelly, just as fact. The way you tell someone it's going to rain. Iris looked at him. I built this ranch to prove him wrong, he said. That was the original reason. Spite dressed up as ambition. He looked at his hands. Then Eliza came, and it became something different. Something worth building for itself. He paused. After she died, I kept working because I didn't know how to stop. If I stopped, I'd have to think. And now, Nora said. He looked at her across the lamplight. Now I'm working because I want to. Because it's mine and it matters, and he stopped. Then, because it's ours. Nora held his gaze across the table. The word was so quiet, so plain. Not a declaration or a performance, just a fact he'd discovered and was saying out loud for the first time. She said yes. Outside, a horse screamed. That night, they sat together at the table, Nora, Ethan, Walt, Iris, and ate supper, and talked about things that weren't dangerous. Walt told a long story about a mule he'd once owned that had strong opinions about Tuesdays. Iris laughed twice, real small laughs, like something unused being carefully tested. Ethan refilled everyone's coffee and said almost nothing, but he was present in the room in a way he hadn't been before, not withdrawn, not watchful, just there, solid and calm and there. After when Walt and Iris had gone to their respective beds, Nora cleaned the dishes and Ethan dried them, and they worked in the comfortable quiet of people who have stopped needing to fill silence. 3 years, Ethan said. He was looking at the dish in his hands. I know. She would have found it, eventually. His voice was not bitter, just factual. She wouldn't have stopped looking. No. Nora agreed. I don't think she would have. He set the dish on the shelf, turned to look at her. I want you to know something, almost something, he said. I want to say it now before tomorrow because tomorrow is complicated and I don't know what it looks like on the other side. Say it, she said. I didn't know what I was asking for when I put that advertisement in the paper. He looked at his hands. I thought I needed someone practical, someone who'd keep the household running and not need too much from me. He looked up. I didn't expect you to be, he paused. I didn't expect to find someone I could stand beside. Nora looked at him, at the lines in his face and the gray at his temples and the particular quality of stillness that she'd come to understand wasn't coldness, but rather the patience of a man who'd learned to wait for things that were real. You have, she said. I know, his voice was quiet. I wanted you to know I know. Outside, the wind moved through the grass and the mountains were dark against the stars. Tomorrow, Pratt would begin moving his pieces, and Dade would find out, and whatever came next would be sharp and dangerous and uncertain. But tonight there was lamplight and the smell of coffee, and the man across the table looking at her like she was something that had arrived in his life without warning and proved to be exactly what he hadn't known he needed. Walt came back an hour later, his horse lathered and his expression grim. Pratt got the message, he said. He's moving. Going to ride out tonight with 3 deputies, won't come to the ranch directly, said that might tip Dade off. He's going to position himself on the north approach road. Walt dropped his hat on the table. He said, tell Voss to hold the line until he gets there. Don't do anything stupid. I never do anything stupid, Ethan said. Walt and Nora looked at each other. He also said, Walt continued with the care of a man delivering an exact message that he's been waiting 3 years for a clean case against Dade, and he is not going to lose it tonight because of recklessness. His word, recklessness. He's worried about me, Ethan said. He's worried about all of us, Walt said, but particularly you. A silence. He's right to be, Nora said. She looked at Ethan steadily. If Dade's men come tonight and Pratt isn't here yet, the goal is to hold, not to fight. To hold long enough for the law to do its job. She paused. Can you do that? Ethan looked at her. The question was real, and she'd meant it as such, not a challenge, not a test. Just an honest question to an honest man. Yes, he said. It sounded like something he was deciding as he said it, something that cost him something to say. Yes, I can do that. Nora nodded once. Good. She spent the hour before dark checking the cellar. It was accessed through a trap door under the kitchen table, a low dry space big enough for two people to wade in without comfort but with safety. She brought down a blanket and a candle and a box of matches and Iris's pistol, which Iris had not asked for back. When she came back up, Ethan was at the window. She came to stand beside him, and they looked out together at the darkening ranch. The horses were quiet in the corral. Walt was in the barn. Iris had taken up her position near the back door with the shotgun she'd been taught to hold that afternoon. The mountains were dark now against the sky. Somewhere out there, Pratt was riding. She would have handled this better than me, Ethan said quietly. He was looking at the ridge. I don't think so, Nora said. I think she would have been exactly as scared as you are right now, and she would have stood here anyway. He looked at her. That's not a criticism, she said. That's the whole point, being scared and standing here anyway. She met his eyes. You've been doing that for 3 years. Standing here anyway. He was quiet for a long moment. The wind moved through the grass outside, and the last light was fading from the sky in long horizontal bands of orange and purple and deep blue. I'm glad you came, he said, simply quietly as though it were a small thing. And it wasn't, but it was real. Me too, she said. They stood together at the window and watched the darkness come. Nora thought about the girl in Silver Falls, who had stood in a back room in a white dress and believed yet again that this time would be different. She had been right, just not in the way she'd imagined. She lay in bed for a long time listening to the sounds of the ranch in the dark. The wind in the grass, the horses shifting in the corral, the particular creaking of the house as it settled under the night sky. She thought about Eliza's letter, about a woman who had known she might die and had spent her last months making sure the truth she'd gathered would outlast her. About the turquoise ring still in Ethan's pocket carried for 3 years because he didn't know what to do with it yet. She was nearly asleep when she heard it. Not a horse, not yet. A low, deliberate sound from the direction of the northern ridge that her body recognized before her mind did people moving through grass in the dark, trying to be quiet. She was out of bed and dressed before she was fully awake. Ethan was already at the window when she came out. He hadn't been asleep either. They're early, he said. How many can you see? Not yet. The torches aren't lit. He checked the rifle. They're coming in quiet first, trying to reach the house before we know. Walt appeared from the hall in his clothes and boots, hair unbrushed, eyes clear. He'd been awake too. Maybe none of them had truly expected sleep tonight. Positions? Ethan said. Walt went to the side window. Ethan took the front. Iris, Nora said. She found the young woman already up, standing in the doorway of the storeroom with the pistol in both hands. Cellar, Nora said, right now. I already told you. You're the witness, Nora said, and she held Iris's gaze and didn't let her look away. Everything that happens tonight only matters if someone is left to tell the truth about it. That's you. She paused. Eliza Voss died before she could. Don't do the same. Iris stared at her. She looked at the pistol in her hands. Then she held it out. Nora took it. Cellar, she said, I'll come for you when it's over. Iris went without another word. Nora lowered the trap door and moved the kitchen table over it and went to take up her position beside Ethan. Ethan. She waited until he looked at her across the low lamplight. Whatever happens tonight, the last 3 months, I want you to know they mattered. He held her gaze. They mattered to me too. Good. She turned back to the window. Then let's survive this. Net! They came at midnight. Not the quiet approach anymore. They had abandoned that when they saw the light in the windows. Now it was torches and horse and the deliberate noise of men who had decided that fear, not stealth, was the better weapon. Nora heard the horses build from nothing to everywhere, a low drumming that came from the direction of the northern hills spreading out as they came. She counted torches through the window glass. 8, 10, 12, a dozen at least, maybe more. Ethan's voice was steady. Pratt should be. He might be delayed. We hold regardless. She picked up her rifle from the rack, checked the load, set it against her shoulder the way Ethan had shown her twice that afternoon. What do they want? The documents first, then whatever Dade decides after. Then they can't have them. Nora, where are the documents? Strong box, floorboard in the bedroom. Then they're staying there. She moved to the window beside him. The riders had spread out across the approach, moving to surround the ranch in the deliberate way of men who had done this before. Torches at the edges, real torches, not lanterns. A statement about what they were prepared to do. At the center of it all, on a tall, dark horse, Harlan Dade. He pulled up 50 yards from the house and looked at it the way a man looks at something he has already decided belongs to him. "Voss," he called. "Come out. Let's settle this without fire." Ethan opened the front door. He stood in it, rifle in hand, the lamplight from behind making a long shadow across the yard. "You're on my land, Dade. I'm standing in front of what's about to be my land." Dade spread his hands. "Give me the documents. Deed me the north parcel. You ride out by morning with your wife and your hired man, and I let you go. That's more than fair. You killed my wife." A silence. "That's a serious accusation," Dade said. "I'd be careful making it in public." "I have the documents," she gathered. Ethan's voice did not waver. 11 families, 10 years of forged deeds, and a sheriff who's been building a case for 3 years and now has everything he needs. Dade's stillness changed. "Where is Pratt?" "On his way." "Then we have time." Dade looked at the house. Paper burns. So do houses. Nora opened the door and stepped onto the porch. She had not planned to. It wasn't strategy, more like the plain fact that she was not a woman who stayed behind a window when something needed to be said face to face. Dade looked at her. Something moved in his expression, surprise, recalculation, and then the particular contempt of a man who has underestimated everyone in his life. "The mail-order bride," he said. "Yes," she said. "The mail-order bride who sent the original documents to the territorial circuit judge 4 days ago. Not a copy, Mr. Dade. The documents themselves. Transcribed in full with Eliza Voss's annotations and her handwriting identified by 3 witnesses in Millstone Creek." She held his gaze. "Burning this house doesn't change that." A silence. "You're bluffing," Dade said. "Ask yourself," Nora said, "whether you believe that. Whether a woman who traveled 2,000 miles alone to marry a man she'd never met is the kind of woman who bluffs." Dade's face had gone very still. "My father." Everyone turned. Iris stood at the side of the house. She had not stayed in the cellar. She stood pale as snow hands, empty at her sides, her voice shaking and her back straight. "I know what happened to Eliza Voss," she said. "I know what you ordered Cole to do. I know about the deeds and the families and all of it, and I've already given a statement to Sheriff Pratt, and I will testify to every word in front of a territorial judge." Her jaw was set. "I'm your daughter, but she was someone's wife. She tried to do the right thing, and you had her killed for it." Dade looked at his daughter for a longer moment. What moved across his face was not fatherly grief. It was the particular pain of a man who has confused ownership with love, and now sees clearly, perhaps for the first time, the difference. "You don't know what you're doing," he said. "Yes, I do," Iris said. "That's the difference between us." The sound of horses on the eastern road. Pratt came over the rise with his deputies riding hard and pulled up between Dade's men in the house. "That'll be Pratt," Walt said from the window. Dade's head turned. His men stirred a restlessness moving through them, the particular instability of hired men whose calculation is shifting. "Hold your positions," Dade said. But the command was softer than he meant it to be. Sheriff Pratt came over the eastern rise with 4 deputies riding hard and pulled up between Dade's men in the house. He was a compact man who moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who had taken the measure of a situation and found himself equal to it. "Harlan Dade," he said. He didn't raise his voice. "You're under arrest for the murder of Eliza Voss, fraud, conspiracy, and about a dozen other charges I'll read to you when I have the time." "You have nothing," Dade said. "I have 11 affidavits from families you defrauded over 10 years. Pratt reached into his coat and removed a folded paper. "I have testimony from your own daughter. I have the original documents gathered by Eliza Voss and sent to the territorial court 3 days ago. And I have a warrant signed by Judge Nathaniel Hadley, who is not, as far as I can determine, on your payroll." He looked at Dade. "Put down your weapons." Dade's men exchanged glances. The man to Dade's right, a lean, gray-templed foreman Nora didn't recognize, slowly, deliberately let his rifle hand drop. One by one, the others followed. Dade sat on his horse and did not move for a long moment. He was looking at the house, at Ethan, standing in the doorway at the light coming out around him. His face had the expression of a man who has been building something for 30 years and is watching it come down. "This isn't over," he said. "It is for tonight," Pratt said. "Get down from the horse." Dade dismounted. "Bien." They brought him in chains and his men with him, and Pratt's deputies sorted the scene with the practiced efficiency of men who knew how to end something. Nora stood in the yard and watched it and waited for the feeling in her chest to change the hell-breath tension she'd been carrying for days, maybe weeks. She waited for it to release. It released slowly. Not all at once, not dramatically, just a gradual loosening like a fist unclenching while Pratt spoke to his deputies and Dade's hired men were sorted, and Iris stood very still at the side of the house, watching her father's hands be bound behind his back. Walt came to stand beside Nora. "Well," he said, "then that worked out." "It did. You want to know something I wasn't sure it would?" "Neither was I." He looked at her sidelong. "You didn't act like it." "No," she said. "I find it's generally better not to." He laughed a surprised, genuine laugh and shook his head. "Miss Calloway, Mrs. Voss, whatever I'm supposed to call you now, you are something else entirely." She looked at Iris, who was watching Dade being led toward Pratt's horses, with an expression Nora recognized, the particular blank of someone who has done the hard thing and hasn't processed yet what it cost. "Iris," she said. The young woman looked up. "Come here," Nora said. She came, and Nora put her arms around her and held her while she finally quietly started to cry. Nora held her for a long time. The torchlight was going as Pratt's men dealt with Dade's riders, and the darkness came back in, slowly softer than before, and somewhere in the north pasture, a nightbird called once and was quiet. Iris cried the way people do when they've been holding it for years. Not noisily, not dramatically, but with a kind of exhausted relief, as though the grief had been waiting patiently behind a very heavy door and had finally been allowed to pass through. "He loved me," she said against Nora's shoulder. "In his way. I want you to know I know that. It wasn't all cruelty." "I know," Nora said. "He taught me to ride when I was 4 years old. He used to read to me before bed." She breathed out unevenly. "I don't know how both things can be true at the same time. How a man can read to his daughter and order a woman killed." "I don't know either," Nora said. "But they can be. People are more than one thing. The part that loved you was real. The part that did the things he did was real too." She held her tighter. "And you were brave enough to know the difference." "I don't feel brave." "No," Nora agreed. "Brave things rarely feel that way when you're doing them. They feel like fear mostly, and you do them anyway." Iris pulled back, eventually wiped her face with the back of her hand, and looked at Nora with red-rimmed eyes. "What happens now?" "Now we go inside," Nora said, "and I make coffee because I think we all need coffee. And tomorrow the hard things start, the legal work, the testimony, the things that take time. But tonight we did what needed doing." She looked at her steadily. "You did what needed doing. Hold on to that." Yeah. Pratt came to find her after the last of Dade's men had been moved out. He took his hat off and stood in the yard and looked at the house and at the people standing around it. Ethan at the porch steps, Walt near the barn, Iris sitting on the fence with her arms around herself. "You sent the documents to Judge Hadley," he said. "To Nora, not to Ethan." "Yes, before you told me." "I sent you a copy. I sent the judge the originals." She held his gaze. "I wanted there to be no version of tonight where the only thing standing between Dade and those documents was one sheriff's office." Pratt looked at her for a long moment. "He almost accused me of being in his pocket," he said. "Tonight when I moved in, did you know he would?" "I thought he might, but you sent me the copy anyway." "I didn't think you were crooked," she said. "I thought you were one man working against someone with more resources. I wanted you to have everything you needed." She paused. "Was I wrong?" "No." He turned his hat in his hands. "You were not wrong." He looked at Ethan, then back at her. "Voss," he called, "you married the right woman." Ethan looked at Pratt, then he looked at Nora. "I know," he said. "Time." The charges were filed within a week. Harlan Dade, she learned then that Dade was the name he had taken when he came west, and that somewhere in Ohio there was a record of a man named Silas Garrett who had left abruptly in 1869 and never gone back, faced counts of murder, fraud, conspiracy, and the dispossession of 11 families across a decade. His foreman Cole, tracked down in a neighboring county within 4 days, faced the same. Barley at the county clerk's office confessed when presented with the documents. One of the county commissioners resigned. The other cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced charge. Iris testified at the preliminary hearing in a voice that shook only at the beginning and steadied as she went on. She was protected by a formal order from the territorial prosecutor's office, which meant very little in terms of practical safety and a great deal in terms of the law's acknowledgement that she had done the right thing at considerable personal cost. She never saw her father again before the trial. The trial was set for late September when the circuit judge could travel to Millstone Creek. In the weeks between, the ranch began to breathe again. The cattle were moved to the north pasture, the one with the spring, the one Dade had been trying to claim for 3 years, and the grass there was good, the water reliable, and Ethan walked the fence lines in the mornings with the particular satisfaction of a man reclaiming something that was always his. Walt taught Iris to ride properly. She was a natural better than him, actually, though he would deny it, and within 2 weeks she was handling horses with an ease that surprised everyone, including herself. Nora tended the kitchen garden and the household and learned gradually to do both well. She burned fewer things. Her bread rose consistently now. She learned that the evenings were the best time on the ranch, the light going gold over the mountains, the cattle settling in the north field, the particular quality of quiet that fell over the land like a second sky. She learned that Ethan hummed sometimes when he was working. Old hymns mostly, and occasionally a song she didn't recognize that she suspected had been Eliza's favorite. She learned that he slept lightly and rose before dawn, and that on the mornings she came out early enough to find him already at the table with his coffee. He would pour her a cup without being asked, and they would sit together in the half-dark and watch the sky change. And those mornings became the thing she looked forward to most. She wrote to Aunt Cecile every Sunday. She described the ranch, the mountains, the people, Ethan, who was difficult and steadfast and kind in ways she hadn't expected, Walt, who was irrepressible, and loyal Iris, who was slowly, carefully learning how to not be her father's daughter. You were right, she wrote in one letter. It's not the place. I could have stayed in Silver Falls my whole life and never felt like I was standing in the right spot. I came 2,000 miles to find a ground that fit me. I hope that doesn't sound foolish. Cecile's answer came 3 weeks later. My dearest Nora, it doesn't sound foolish. It sounds exactly like your mother, except she waited too long to do it, and you didn't. Be well, be happy. Those are the same instruction. No. There was a letter from Edmund Hale. She recognized the handwriting before she turned the envelope over and almost set it aside unopened. Then she opened it. It was short. He had heard she was married. He wanted her to know he didn't know why he was writing, except that he felt she deserved to know that he had done what his mother asked him to do and had spent every day since regretting it. He was engaged now to a woman his family approved of. He did not say he was happy. Nora read the letter once. Then she folded it and held it for a moment. She felt almost nothing, not triumph, not pain, not the old sourness of humiliation remembered. Just a faint, distant recognition, the way you recognize the shape of a storm that passed over you a long time ago and left you standing unbroken on the other side. She thought about the 2 weddings she had not had, about all the versions of her life that had not happened, about the long, unlikely chain of small refusals and wrong choices and accidents that had added up to this particular October morning in Montana Territory, with the frost on the grass and the mountains turning dark gold and Ethan's boots on the porch step coming inside. She put the letter in the stove, watched it go. Babe. She was at the kitchen table when Ethan came in. He poured 2 cups of coffee and set hers down in front of her without breaking stride. She looked at the cup. She looked at him, settling into the chair across from her. Letter from home, he asked. Not exactly. He looked at her face and didn't ask further. I'm good, she said, and she meant it. He nodded once and picked up his cup. They sat in the morning quiet while outside the frost melted off the grass, and the horses moved in the corral, and somewhere in the north pasture the cattle were beginning their slow way toward the spring. Then Ethan set down his cup and said, I want to ask you something. She looked at him. He reached into his shirt pocket and set something on the table between them. A ring, small silver set with a stone the color of deep water, turquoise she thought mined somewhere in the west, the kind of blue that looked different in different light. This was Eliza's, he said. Her mother gave it to her. I've been keeping it. He looked at it. I didn't know for a long time what to do with it, whether to hold on to it as something of hers, or whether... He stopped, started again. She told me to live again. That's what the letter said. Don't stay in the dark for me. Let yourself live again. Nora looked at the ring. I married you out of a practicality, Ethan said. His voice was careful and serious in the way of a man choosing each word before he lets it go. I came to it honestly. I told you what I could offer, and I told you what I couldn't, and I believed what I said. He looked up. But I didn't know yet. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't know how much I was going to... He stopped. How much you were going to matter. Nora held very still. I love you, he said, It came out simply as he said most true things without ornament, without performance, like something stated from the center. I don't know when that started. I don't think it matters. I know it now. He looked at the ring on the table. So I'm asking you again, not because we need each other, not because the arrangement makes sense, because I want you here, because this is yours as much as it's mine, and I want you to have said yes, knowing that. He looked at her. Will you marry me? He said, again, for real this time. Nora looked at the ring, at the man across from her, this difficult, spare, honest man, with grief in the lines of his face, and a letter from his dead wife folded somewhere in his heart, telling him to live. She thought I came 2,000 miles for a practical arrangement. She thought how strange and perfect that it became this. She picked up the ring. She turned it in the light, watching the turquoise shift from blue to green to something in between. Then she looked at him. Yes, she said, for real this time. He took the ring from her hand. He slid it onto her finger carefully, the way he did everything without hurry, without performance. It fit. He held her hand for a moment with both of his. She'd want you to have it, he said. I know. Nora turned her hand slightly, watching the stone catch the morning light. I'll wear it like she wore it, like it was made for this ranch. He leaned across the table and kissed her. Not brief this time, not careful. Real and warm and full of what it had taken them 3 months to earn. When they broke apart, Walt's voice came cheerfully from the barn doorway. About time, I've been waiting for that for weeks. Ethan turned toward the barn door. How long have you been standing there? Long enough. Walt sounded delighted. Congratulations, by the way. To both of you. You want me to ride to town? I can organize something. People would come out. There'd be dancing. No dancing, Ethan said. There can be a little dancing, Nora said. Walt disappeared in the direction of his horse. Nora, a small celebration, she said. With the people who live here, that's all. She looked at him. We didn't have a real wedding. We should have at least a small real celebration. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, fine. And the way he said it, resigned but not truly resistant, as though he was learning to let things in, made her realize that was exactly what this looked like. A man learning to let things in. She turned the ring on her finger. The turquoise caught the morning light and shifted from blue to something greener, deep and changeable. Tell me something small about her, Nora said. Something you haven't told anyone. Ethan was quiet for a moment. The house was still around them, the morning not yet fully awake. Outside, Walt could be heard saddling his horse with great enthusiasm. Somewhere in the kitchen, Iris was making quiet sounds of occupation, the ordinary sound of someone beginning to settle. She couldn't whistle, Ethan said. He looked at the table. Used to try and she just couldn't get the sound right. It drove her crazy. She'd practice sometimes when she thought I wasn't listening. Every winter when things were quiet, standing at the window. Nora smiled. Could she ever do it? No. He was quiet for a moment. She had a song she liked that she wanted to whistle. Old hymn kind of. Something her mother sang when she was young. He hummed a few bars of it low and careful, those same few notes Nora had heard from him in the mornings in the barn when he thought no one was near. That one. I've heard you hum that, she said. He looked at her. Something moved in his expression. I didn't know anyone heard, he said. I heard. I thought it was yours. It was hers, he paused. But I suppose now it's ours, if you don't mind. I don't mind, she said. I like it. They sat together in the morning quiet, and the mountains were visible through the bare window, and the frost was melting off the grass, and after a while Ethan reached over and refilled her coffee cup without being asked. She thought, yes, this is what it looks like. Not without history. Not without the particular weight of who they'd both been before this. But honest, warm, real. Weird. Walt organized a small celebration that grew despite everyone's best intentions to encompass 12 people by the evening. The neighbors came. The Hendersons from 3 miles east. Old Carmichael from the South Fork. The widow Prentice, who brought a pie that she set on the table with the authority of a woman who knew her pie was the best in the district. The Reverend Hoskins, who heard there was an occasion and arrived with a bottle and a booming laugh and no invitation. Someone brought a fiddle. Someone else brought a guitar. Walt began dancing before anyone asked him to, pulling Iris into it with an enthusiasm that made her laugh, in spite of herself, that real startled laugh Nora had heard only twice before. Ethan stood at the edge of the yard with Nora and watched it all with an expression she had learned to read, not the closed-off stillness of before, but something quieter and warmer. Wondering almost. Is this all right? She asked. It's good, he said. Then after a pause, I'd forgotten what this looks like. What? People. He looked at the yard full of them. People on this ranch. She slipped her hand into his. He held it. They didn't dance, but they stood together in the firelight and watched Walt spin Iris through an increasingly complicated reel and listened to the fiddle carrying the old tune out over the dark grass, and the mountains were invisible now, but they were there, permanent and patient, the way good things are. The charges were filed within a week. Harlan died, and behind him the ghost of the man named Silas Garrett, who had reinvented himself as something respectable and failed, sat before the circuit judge in the Millstone Creek courthouse on a morning when the first snow of the season had dusted the mountain peaks and the air had a cold clarity that made everything seem very precise. Nora sat in the gallery beside Ethan. His arm was against hers, warm and steady. Iris sat one row behind them. Walt was beside her. He had taken to sitting beside her without comment, and she had taken to letting him, and that was as far as it had gone, but Nora suspected it would go further in its own time. The prosecutor read the charges. 11 families, 30 years, 2 murders. The judge listened with the particular expressionlessness of a man who has heard many terrible things and learned to hold himself separate from his reaction in the moment. When they brought Dade in, he looked diminished, not broken, but contained in a way he hadn't been before. The largeness that had come from operating without consequence had been removed. What was left was just a man, and not a particularly formidable one. He didn't look at Iris. Iris looked at him. She sat very straight, and her hands were folded in her lap, and her face was the face of someone who has made a permanent decision and is living in the first days of knowing it. The testimony took 2 days. Iris spoke on the second morning. Her voice was steady throughout. When the judge read the verdict, guilty on all counts, sentencing to follow, Nora heard Ethan breathe out beside her. A long, slow release. 3 years of it. She put her hand over his. He turned his palm up and held it. Man. Outside the courthouse afterward, in the cold September air, Pratt found them on the steps. "It's done," he said. He looked tired, in the way of a man who has finished something that took longer than it should have. "Cole's verdict comes next week. Brierly's already given his plea. The commissioner is cooperating." He shook Ethan's hand. 11 families are going to get their land back, or compensation. That process will take time, but it'll happen. Ethan nodded. "I owe you an apology," Pratt said, "for the 3 years I had to move slow, for not being able to tell you what I was doing." "You were protecting the case," Ethan said. "I understand it. Understanding it and living with it aren't the same thing." Pratt looked at Nora. "And I owe you, I'm not sure what. You came here knowing nothing and handed me everything." He was quiet for a moment. "Eliza Voss spent 2 years building that case and died before it could be used. You found it in 3 weeks. She hid it well," Nora said. "She also chose good people around her. Ethan, Walt." She paused. "People worth leaving it for." Pratt put his hat back on. "Get yourselves home," he said. "Both of you, you've earned a quiet winter." He walked away down the street. Around them, the people of Millstone Creek went about their business in the cool fall air, and the mountains stood above the town as they always had, indifferent and enormous and permanent. They rode home in the late afternoon when the light had gone, that particular shade of gold that only happens in autumn, when the sun is lower and the shadows are long, and everything seems to be saying farewell to itself in the most beautiful way it knows. Ethan rode beside her, and they didn't talk much, which was fine. They had gotten very good at the kind of silence that doesn't need filling. Iris rode ahead with Walt, who was telling her something that was apparently both long and amusing. Her laugh drifted back to them on the cold air. "She's going to be all right," Ethan said. "Yes," Nora agreed. "She is." They came over the last hill, and there was the ranch below them, the log house, the barn, the corral, the kitchen garden put to bed for winter, the mountains rising behind everything in their ancient, permanent way. Smoke from the chimney because Walt had lit the fire before they left. The cattle visible in the north pasture moving slowly through the grass. Home. Nora looked at it for a moment before they started down the hill. She thought about the woman she'd been in Silver Falls, the one who had stood in the back room of a church in a borrowed veil and waited for a man who wasn't coming. The one who had asked herself for years, "What's wrong with me? Why do they always leave?" That woman had been wrong about herself in almost every way that mattered. She had believed that she was the problem, that the fault lived in her, that the leaving was something she caused. She had spent a decade measuring her worth by whether other people stayed. She wasn't that woman anymore. Not because Montana had fixed her, or because Ethan had healed her, or because she'd done brave things and found that courage changed you. Those things were all true, but they weren't the point. The point was simpler. She had chosen. She had kept choosing every day with no guarantee of outcome. She had been afraid and stayed anyway. She had been uncertain and moved forward anyway. She had arrived in a strange place with a trunk and a journal and a man's letter that said, "I won't promise you happiness, but I'll promise you honesty." And she had said, "That's enough. I can work with that." That was what she had learned about herself in Montana. Not that she was brave, though she was. Not that she was strong, though she was. But that she could work with enough. That enough in the right hands becomes more. Ethan looked over at her as they started down the hill. His face was open and quiet in the late afternoon light, the lines in it catching the gold. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Home," she said. He looked at the ranch below, then back at her. "Good," he said. They rode down together into the light. "Yeah." The trial of Harlan Dade concluded on the 4th of October. He was sentenced to hang. Cole was sentenced the following week. 11 families received restitution orders from the territorial court. The process took 3 years, but all were eventually compensated or had their land returned. Iris Dade remained at the Voss Ranch through the winter and into the following spring. She took a job the next summer at a horse farm in the next county, which she eventually bought. She married a man named Walt Briggs the year after that in a ceremony that was considerably louder and more festive than either of the Voss weddings. Sheriff Amos Pratt served 3 more terms before retiring. He spent his last years in Millstone Creek and was known, among other things, for keeping a framed copy of a certain set of land documents on his office wall. Nora Calloway Voss lived on the Voss Ranch for the rest of her life. She kept 2 things on the windowsill in the main room: her mother's journal and a small turquoise ring that had been given to her by a man who had been told by the woman he loved most to stop staying in the dark. She wore it every day. She thought it was the most honest piece of jewelry she had ever owned. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end. If Nora and Ethan's story moved you, if you've ever felt like the wrong people left, or wondered if you'd ever find the place you truly belonged, leave a comment below and tell me your city. I want to see how far this story travels. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a story. New episodes every week. Long-form Western romance, old-fashioned values, and the kind of love that's worth the long road to find it. Until next time, keep going. You never know what's on the other side of the hard choice.